Bibliophiles of the internet, my name's Adriana, and today I'm here to bring you my April wrap-up. The first book I read in April was Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi. I just uploaded a full spoiler-free discussion/review video for this book in which I go through its pros and its cons. For me, the cons drastically outweighed the pros, so you can check out that video if you want my full take. But I really don't want to spend any more time and energy discussing this book, and as beautiful as it is definitely not staying on my shelf. Then my library came through with the audiobook for The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, read by Kathleen Gatti. This is a dark, Russian-inspired fairy tale about Vasilisa Petrovna, who was raised in the chilly wilderness and who grew up listening to her nurse's fairy tales. She was raised on a healthy fear of devilish tricksters and frost demons, but she always knew that as long as they honored the spirits of the house and the forest, her family would always be safe and protected. That is all jeopardized when her father goes to Moscow to find a new wife and returns with a devout Christian woman who forbids Vasilisa's family from practicing the old ways. Her family does as they're bid, but it's not long before evil descends on their village and a curse begins to slowly destroy her family, her home, and her neighbors. Some mild triggers for graphic descriptions of dead animals and for assault. This story is stunningly written, beautifully imagined and realized, and it was such an immersive reading experience. I'm so glad I listened to the audiobook because fairy tales are rooted in such a deep background of oral tradition, so listening to this story unfold made it all the more magical, I think. What stood out to me the most was Vasya herself. She exudes an incredible, singular kind of strength that is so satisfying to witness. Everybody is telling her what she has to do, what she has to become, what she should fear, and how she should fear it, and she is not about to let anybody, for any reason, dictate how she feels. We see how this entire village changes when the Christian faith is introduced, and when they're told to feel shame and fear for the evil, sacrilegious things they used to believe, and that disconnect from tradition is what unleashes all this chaos. Through everything, Vasya knows exactly who she is and what she believes. She shows that in a world full of absolutes and obligations, there is power in what we choose for ourselves. And the story makes it really clear that fear is not something that we're born with, it's something we're taught. Vasya stays true to herself, stays true to the strength she was taught, which is what makes her a game changer in this story. I cannot wait to listen to the sequel, but I love this so much and I gave it 4.5 stars. After that, I listened to Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi, read by Bonnie Turpin. I'm pretty sure you've heard of this book. Its own voices Nigerian fantasy about a land known as Orisha, which was once teeming with magic. But after a bloody massacre referred to only as the Raid, magi were targeted and killed, and magic itself was completely wiped from Orisha. Now a girl named Zayli has the chance to bring magic back to Orisha if she can team up with her brother and a runaway princess as they outrun the crown prince, who is also the captain of the guard and hell-bent on wiping out magic for good. First of all, I just want to say that this is a really incredible audiobook. Bonnie Turpin turns out an excellent performance. What this story has going for it is that it reads as very cinematic. There's no shortage of action or political intrigue, and there's something intense happening on every single page. So no matter where you are in the story, it's very hard to turn away. My biggest takeaway was in regards to how this story succeeds in discussing the relationship between oppression and power. I like how these characters actually address how the solution to a drastically skewed power system is not to simply revert all of the power to the other side, especially when it comes to magic, because that could just result in even more destruction and chaos. I mean, the would-be magi of this world have absolutely no idea about the power that resides within them, how to wield it, how to control it, how it can be weaponized. And if these characters just restore magic in the midst of this war, what are the consequences? And as a reader, you get a very clear sense of how hopeless and endless this struggle really is. Both sides are acting from a place of trauma and fear rather than a place of healing or wanting to bridge the gap between beliefs and politics, which means they can only move towards producing even more pain. So as the series continues, I think it's going to amount in something else having to give. That said, I was giving major side-eye to some parts of this story, namely the convenience and the underdeveloped relationships, specifically the dreaded insta-love. While this story maintains a high level of intensity, this small group of insurgents often gets exactly what they need when they need it. If they're after some magical item, they obtain it. If they need allies, they stumble into a den of mercenaries. I'm not saying they had it easy, but there was a factor of convenience. And I'm all about sexual tension. I'm here for enemies to lovers, as y'all know. I'm here for the hunter succumbing to the hunted. But even though I wanted to be forgiving, I was definitely left cringing at the insta-love. I think that romantic element was just messy because of this condensed timeline more than anything else. This is a really big book, and the whole thing takes place over the course of a few days, maybe a week. And because that level of love the characters were describing involves some element of trust, it just didn't add up. Some of these characters experience really big changes of heart in a short amount of time, and it just comes off as feeling underbaked. So even though I'm definitely looking forward to the sequel, I was left feeling a bit torn about this one, and ultimately I gave it 3.5 stars. Then after what seems like a lifetime of waiting, I finally read/listened to Circe by Madeline Miller, read by Perdita Weeks. This is her latest mythological overhaul about the demigoddess/ancient Greek witch known as Circe, who is the daughter of Helios, god of the sun. She is very much overlooked, underestimated, unloved, and ultimately when she's first exploring her abilities as a witch, she does something that results in her exile to a remote island in the human world. And it's there where she encounters all manner of visitors, divine and human alike, and begins to make her own life. This story was vastly different from the Song of Achilles, but the elements that make it so extraordinary, successful, and unshakable are one and the same. I am planning to do a full 5 reasons to read video for this book sometime in the next couple of weeks because I really need a separate space to carefully explore my thoughts. But this was a definite 5-star read and one that I can't wait to revisit many times. Then I finally read Foxheart by Claire Legrand. This is a middle-grade high fantasy story about an orphan named Quicksilver who was raised in a horrible convent and eventually decides to make a life for herself by becoming the world's greatest thief with her trusty canine companion, Fox. In this world, witches have been hunted to near extinction, and one day Quicksilver meets an extraordinary witch who shows her real magic, and she realizes if she can learn this magic, she can make a life for herself that's comfortable and safe. But this old witch turns out to be part of something much bigger than she thought, a key to bringing back witches and magic, and suddenly Quicksilver has to decide whether she's going to keep surviving for herself or embark on this adventure that could make her a legend. I really enjoyed this, mostly because I was able to see that this fantastical hero's quest element was actually secondary, maybe even tertiary to this book's true strengths, which lie in its characters and its themes. I don't think I've ever seen a chosen hero like Quicksilver who's afraid, who's been hurt and abandoned so much that her first instinct is self-preservation. You clearly see instances where she's experiencing anxiety and depression outright after going through all this loss and feeling overwhelmed by this quest to reclaim magic for all witches that's just fallen into her lap. What if she fails? What if she makes the wrong choices? What if she can't do it? What if she doesn't want to be chosen? You see her experiencing that panic and retreating into herself. And there's also something to be said about how the story explores the collective. There's this repeated line about how many will be mighty, and you see how collective magic or collective power refers not just to witches concentrating their efforts all at once, but working together collectively through the years to shift the balance. Change is not immediate, it's a painstakingly gradual process. So yeah, the actual plot and quest itself might have had a few hiccups, but I just can't stop thinking about how important it is to read about heroes like Quicksilver and to have fantasy stories that explore ideas like these. In the end, I gave this one 4 stars. Then my poetry collection for April was Reina Biddy's A Psalm for Us. I chose this collection because I'm always about supporting my badass Latinx poets getting the work done, but ultimately I was disappointed by this collection. For me, it was all just too general, too vague. The speaker talks a lot about how they've been hurt, how they're trying to be better, how they're trying to love themselves and be okay with imperfection, how they're learning what kind of people or ideas deserve their time and energy, which is all great, but there's nothing real or concrete to ground you in these poems. And the same vague ideas were being repeated again and again without making any impact. What I love about poetry is that it's a very close, condensed form of heightened language that transports you to a specific place, feeling, or moment, and I just felt like I was reading some granola chicks' social media captions. They're nice sentiments, they're authentic to the speaker, but it just feels like surface. So sadly, even though I really wanted to be all about it, I gave this collection 2.5 stars. Finally, I closed out April by listening to Leah on the Offbeat by Becky Albertalli, read by Shannon Purser, aka Barb from Stranger Things. This is queer lit. It's about the badass fat bisexual drummer Leah Burke, who we were first introduced to in Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda. This takes place during the gang's senior year of high school, and with all the stress and anticipation of college and end-of-the-year activities, their friend group starts to fracture in unexpected ways. Leah herself is struggling with her unrequited feelings for one Abby Suso, but knows that being with her would take a major shakeup. And she's also trying to get to a place where she can actually come out as bi to her friends. It pains me to say, but while I really enjoyed this book, I didn't love it. And I was struggling with my mixed feelings for so long because there's this stigma that if you don't outright love this book, you're a villain who doesn't support FF relationships. But I think this is a case where we can acknowledge that the representation itself is incredibly important and valid, but that the mere presence of representation doesn't automatically make a book good. Both can be true at once. I really needed like 100 more pages of this book for it to feel complete, especially because so much of it is spent in angst and tension, and we didn't really get those moments that I know this author can deliver where the two characters are really discovering each other and realizing, wow, this person is making me feel things, and holy crap, they might be feeling things back. That wonder, that joy, that newness was really missing for me in this book. And I think it was even more difficult to connect because these characters have a history that we're not fully privy to, and they also blow right past some really important conversations and conflicts that needed more attention. It's kind of another case of issues being picked up when needed and then discarded a short time later to never really make a reappearance. Plus, I felt like Leah's story took a back seat every time there was a Simon moment, and there were quite a few that overshadowed the main narrative. So while I liked seeing where Leah's anger and discomfort stems from, while I thought the feeling of realizing there's a disparity between other people's reality and your own expectations was well explored, I was also disappointed, which sucks to say. There's great humor, there's heart, there's wry honesty and hard truths, all of which Becky Albertalli does so well, but I definitely had issues with this one, and I think I'm settling on 3 stars. So those are all the books I read last month. Of course, if you've read any of these yourself and you have any pressing thoughts, I would love to hear them in the comments. But that's everything I had for this wrap up today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.